Hi, this is Lives Touched by Pets, a show for those who love and are loved by pets. I'm your host, Lisa Desatnik, a certified trainer with so much potential in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am so glad that you're here. Welcome. I don't know about you, but when I've shared a life with a pet, the love that we shared has been so profound and so beautiful that saying goodbye is so difficult. And that's why today I'm joined by my friend Tammy Wynn, a beautiful soul who is founder and CEO of an organization called Paws, the first complete end-of-life pet hospice. Tammy is a licensed therapist with over 30 years experience and a vet tech. Her team has compassionately helped over 30,000 pet parents. And so today, I think her insight is going to help you when it comes time to send your pet to the Rainbow Bridge. I've known Tammy for years. She's such an inspirational person, and I am thrilled to be able to talk with her and have her share her insights with you today. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to say right back at you, we have known each other for years, and you are an inspiration. The education that you bring out to the world is so important. So thank you for doing all you do as well.
Let's start with telling us about a pet that has really inspired you and that means a lot to you, either current or in your past.
So I had two cats, Cagney and Lacey. They were 18. And Cagney began to fail, and I had never been with anyone in my family who had gotten sick and died. My grandparents lived out of state, and so they died, and I went to their funeral. But Cagney, my child, I didn't have human children, so Cagney and Lacey were my children, was my first time to go through end of life. And when Cagney began to fail, I asked my veterinarian what was going on, and she said, well, she's old, she's 18, it's time. And I'm like, time for what? And she's like, to put her down. And I'm like, what? And there was just no compassion, no education to me about what was going on with her. And I just knew after I lost her, there had to be a kinder and gentler way. So she was the inspiration behind Paws, because sometimes what brings you to your knees is what really demonstrates what you're here on earth to do.
I wish I knew about Paws when I lost Chester, who was my soulmate bird. Like 9 years ago, maybe. He died in my arms, and it was so hard. It was so devastating. To have had your service then. I think you're such a gift to so many people that are in this journey. And so thank you. Let's talk about some of your insight to help other people and help our listeners. So I've heard you talk about the stages of grief. Can you talk about that for a minute and what that entails?
So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is who I followed on this, and she has stages of grief. And I'm going to walk through them because it doesn't matter if you're grieving and losing an inanimate object or a loved one. You go through the same stages of grief, and I'm going to prove it. So if I have to get to a meeting and I reach for my car keys to go to the meeting and they're not there, the first thing I do is go into denial. That's the first stage of grief. So this is an inanimate object, and I'm already going into the first stage of grief. So I can't believe they're not here. They've got to be here. I'm looking for them. The next stage is anger. Now, wait a minute. I've got to get to this meeting. Where are those keys? So go through anger, and then the keys aren't coming back. Then I bargain. I'm like, oh, God, if you'll just give me the keys this one more time, I'll hang them on the hook every single time. From now on, when I come back in, just give them to me this one more time. And the keys don't come back. So we go into the next stage of reorganization, like, okay, I have a spare set of keys. Where are they? And I go to the dresser drawer, get out my keys, and I accept that those keys are not going to get me to the meeting, and I get on with it, which is the last and fifth stage of grief, and I drive to my meeting. But if you're like me, you're at that meeting and you're not thinking about what's going on at the meeting at that point. You're thinking about where are those keys? So what I found as a therapist was that people would grieve a pet and they would do everything they could to put the brakes on of ever getting to acceptance because they didn't want their pet to go in the rearview mirror where they would forget about their pet. Their pet had meant so much to them, had given them unconditional love. They didn't want that. So they kind of keep themselves in the stages of grief without really fulfilling what that pet was supposed to do for them, which was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross found on her own deathbed was the 6th stage of grief, and that is meaning. What was this relationship all about? What was this life all about? So when you grieve a pet, you go through all those 5 stages of grief. If you go through it for an inanimate object like your car keys, your phone, your glasses, then you're definitely going to go through those stages for a loved one. But meaning, if you'll do the work on the 6th stage, what was this relationship about? What was it meant to teach me? What was I meant to learn from this? Then you really mine everything that you should have gotten out of that relationship with your pet and their passing. Their passing doesn't have to be an ending.
Oh my goodness. I love that metaphor talking about the keys because that's so true. And we definitely do go through this. And, I've heard that it very well. I've seen it with my own heart. This that people can grieve more for a pet than they can for somebody else, another human being.
Well, because human beings, unfortunately, are trying to be like pets, and they're not going to achieve it. And what I mean by that is pets just naturally give unconditional love. And humans strive to do it, but it's a lot of hard work for humans. It doesn't come as naturally for humans to give that unconditional love. So when you receive it from a pet and that's all of a sudden gone, it's not that easy to just replace with another family member.
It's huge. Oh my gosh. So self-care is so important when we go through this. Can you talk about that and the importance of self-care?
Oh, can I talk about it?
Sure.
I even have a prop for it. Okay, are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's see.
So I finally invented what I call the self-care fraud.
Oh my gosh. And, for those listening, you can't see that, but it is. Oh, did you draw that?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, well, let me describe that for our listeners. So there's these round eyes and these huge eyelashes and a round nose, and it says self-care fraud. Okay, so now you have to describe what does it mean to have self-care fraud?
Okay, so that's on a paper bag that I put on my own head because I have been a self-care fraud. I have been doing Angel's Paws now it got put in my heart 20 years ago this year, and we've actually been open. This is our 14th year. And so I have been talking about self-care to my pet parents who are amazing caregivers to their pets. I've been talking about it to my staff who are amazing caregivers to our clients, but I have not personally been doing it. And as a result, I became a self-care fraud because I was very sick in the Angel's Paws journey. 3 years into starting Angel's Paws, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 3 metastatic breast cancer, so a very aggressive form. I had the full gamut of all of the treatments. Breast cancer did not run in my family. So the stress and the not taking care of myself is really the only culprit that we can come up with that did it. And so then we fast forward more years later to just this last May, almost a year ago. I was put in the hospital with 5 strokes. I had 5 strokes, and miraculously, I have no stroke symptoms, but it was determined I had a blood clotting disorder, and it was because of my diet. I just was eating fast food, and I was taking care of everybody, but that meant I had to feed myself in a very quick way. And and I was feeding myself junk. And as a result, I made myself very sick. I corrected my diet. I drink green smoothies every single day, and I am fully cured. And so I learned that I can talk a good game to everybody, but I was a self-care fraud, and now I'm a reformed self-care fraud because I am taking care of me so that I can continue my mission and my ministry to take care of pets and people in their most difficult part of their relationship with their pet.
That is so important. And I've got to admit, sometimes I'm a fraud too. I think it's easy to be that way. And when you're in a service industry, I am too. And I work on some tough behavior cases. Doing self-care is so important. For me, pickleball, it's my happy place. I love pickleball. I have to stay healthy so I can keep playing pickleball. But yeah, that is so important. And being with friends and laughing and enjoying life. Absolutely. I love that you brought that up because I bet a lot of people can relate to that.
Don't take care of you. You can't take care of that beloved pet or a beloved human. You just can't. The saying that you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can care for others. I mean, I've said that. I can't tell you how many times I've said that. But it really is true. And I finally have taken it to heart, and it's made a huge difference.
Yay. Okay, so we need to talk about the rainbow scale. People have a really difficult time emotionally, I think, with this decision. It's no surprise that this would be a really difficult decision. And you talk about the rainbow scale of recognizing when it's time. Can you talk to people about that?
I realized that one of the big statements that most people were hearing from their vet was, you're going to know. You're going to know when it's time. And usually attached to that statement was, they're going to stop eating. And that was just one quality of life indicator. And now we're overlooking so many other quality of life indicators that the pet was kind of raising their hand saying, I'm tired, I have a problem here. But they're still eating. And as long as they were still eating, then they just sort of overlooked that. I created a rainbow scale because people ask me, how do I know when it's time to send my pet to the rainbow bridge? And so I use the acronym of RAINBOW. The first one is we're looking for significant changes in the routine. The R is routine. So they do things every single day. Pets are very much in a routine, and suddenly they start getting off of their routine. For example, I had a client whose pet absolutely hated water. She hated water that through her whole life, she'd go by the bathroom door. She would never venture in because there was a lot of water in there. She would never go in. One day she came home from work and her pet was in the shower. And she's like, this is very different. So that's an example of something that's just completely outside of the pet's routine. They will start doing things to give you indicators like that. A is attitude, their happiness quotient. So, it used to be when you'd jingle the car keys to go somewhere, your pet's right there at your ankles, like, okay, where are we going? Where are we going? What are we going to do? They're no longer doing that with things. When you open the refrigerator, they're nowhere in sight. So there's things that used to make them happy that they're just not engaging with anymore. The I is incontinence. And the thing is about incontinence, pets know that they're not supposed to go outside of their litter box and they know they're not supposed to go in the house. And they actually feel shame about it when it happens. And yet they can't help themselves. So incontinence is something that we as pet parents tend to accommodate, but the pet is still suffering because they know they shouldn't do it. They actually have kind of a sad look on their face. And I don't know about you, Lisa, but there's emotional suffering and physical suffering. And I think a lot of times emotional suffering actually is worse, hurts worse than some physical suffering you can get into. So we don't want to overlook the things that we're willing to overlook, but the pet doesn't want to. The N is nutrition, and that is willingness to eat and drink. The B is breathing, labored breathing. A lot of times I hear about families, their pet starts labored breathing and they think they're hot, and so they bring a fan to them. But actually, a lot of times labored breathing is a sign of pain. So there are a lot of pets who are going to mask their pain, but one of our tips that we can see is that they get into some labored breathing, so watch for that. The O is obvious pain. And obvious pain is when a pet is pacing, circling, very restless, yelping, vocalizing. To me, vocalizing is a deal breaker. It doesn't mean the pain just arrived. It means that they can no longer hide the fact that they have pain. So that's the obvious pain. And then the W is walking and mobility issues. You know, I read a lot about how do humans define quality of life? Humans define quality of life many times as being able to be independent. As soon as they lose their independence, it's rough. They don't feel like they have quality of life. So when a pet can no longer get up and go just get a drink of water across the room when they want it, or they're debating like, I'm really thirsty, but getting up and walking over there is more scary. I'm just going to sit here and be thirsty. That's a rough life. It's not quality. So that is the rainbow scale. It helps us look just past, well, they're not eating. They can be eating right up to the end. In fact, we at Angel's Paws prefer it when they're still eating because we want to bring them some very special treats, because I think it's a bridge too far when they're no longer eating. It means that the one joy that they really, really loved is gone, and now they're in true suffering.
I love that analogy with the rainbow, especially as people talk about their dog going over the rainbow bridge. So what I heard you say is to look for these symptoms in your dog that may help you in knowing when the time may be right. The R stands for routine. The A stands for attitude. The I stands for incontinence. The N stands for nutrition. The B stands for breathing. The O is for obvious pain. And the W is for walking and mobility. Yeah, and that definitely goes a lot further than just saying, well, my dog's not eating right. So that's very helpful, I think, because especially it's such an emotional time to have those concrete outline of what to look for, I would think could really be helpful and help people through the process of understanding that and what to look for. So if you hear about a friend who's going through this, what are some ways that you can support that friend?
So whenever you hear that somebody's suffering with this, first of all, none of us want to think about it for our own pet. So we immediately start avoiding that person sometimes, and just because we don't want to face the facts for ourselves. And so that is exactly the wrong thing to do. We want to engage with that person. And the other reason why we avoid them a lot of times is because we're afraid, I don't know what to say. I'm going to say the wrong thing. So I'm better off just to tiptoe around away from this person and not deal with them. So that's exactly the wrong thing. And I learned this lesson the best from a client, and his name was Simon. Simon was a black lab. So let me tell you about my experience with Simon and how I learned this very important message about what you do when somebody is going through anticipatory loss or anticipatory grief for a loss that's coming. And so I was called out to a family's home. It was 2 little girls and a mom and dad. And mom and dad were really concerned about the girls because they did not know life without Simon. He was there before them. And so they didn't know how they were going to navigate these waters. So I went out to their home, knocked on the door, and Simon was the first one who greeted me at the door. And he had this big oral tumor, and he was drooling all the way down to the ground. I mean, he was just but he didn't care. He was there to greet me with that unconditional love, and he had his head right in my bag because he could smell the treats that I had definitely brought for him. And so we all came into the living room. Simon got on his bed. I gave him some treats. The family, we all sat down on the living room floor, and we just started to talk. And we started to talk about how important Simon was in everybody's life. And there was not a dry eye in the house. We were all crying, talking about how meaningful this dog's presence was in their life. Well, we went through the time and we started talking, and I let them know that it was no accident that Simon came into their life at that particular time when the girls were, being born and coming up, because he was meant to be their teacher and to be the first one who actually taught them about the beauty of the circle of life and what end of life can be like. And I said, and he's taught so many lessons to all of you, and I'm going to challenge you to make lists of the lessons that Simon taught you. And I put them on teams. Mom and Dad were on a team and the girls were on a team. And I said, I want you to outdo each other with the list of lessons that Simon taught you. And they started talking trash to each other. The girls were fist bumping because they were going to win this competition. And so the whole mood changed and I left. So I was in the shower the next morning and I thought, well, I met Simon for a little bit. What lesson did he teach me in my very brief moment with him? And what I realized, Lisa, was that he taught me what Angel's Paws is all about and what my job in Angel's Paws is. Because we're not going to change the outcome. Nothing Angel's Paws is going to do. We can certainly make things easier for everybody with information, with pain management, but we're not going to change the outcome. And Simon sat over on his bed while we were all crying. And he just sat there and laid on his bed. He did not come over and lick everybody's tears and try to fix everything. He also did not run out of the room while everybody was crying. He just stayed in the room and was present. And he just took turns walking around the room, making eye contact with all of us. And he'd finish with that person and he'd start over again. And he was just present. And I realized that's what he taught me. Angel's Paws isn't going to fix anything. But what we will do is we will run to families who are having the worst moment with their pet, and we will be with them. We will just be with them. And all of these people's families and friends could just learn a lesson from Simon. And it's just that. Just be there. You don't have to say the right things. You don't have to do anything, but be there, be present, validate with your presence, and listen.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I just have chills down my spine. I love that story.
What a legacy for Simon that he is able, through your show, Lisa, to be able to reach so many people with that message.
There are so many life lessons all around us that can be taught from so many of us, from our humans and our non-humans. Simon was a pretty wise guy, and you learned so much from him. Wow. So, yeah, the message, just be there and just validate. And so I love the other thing that you talked about is even in the sorrow, even in the grief, even in the sadness, you turn that around to talk about celebration. And that's truly the gift that our pets give us and what we give to our pets, to celebrate and not to forget in the midst of the sadness, in the midst of everything bad about that situation, to remember those gifts and celebrate them.
I think a lot of times people want to focus on the end and what the last few days were even like, and they can't kind of shake that out of their memory. And they just spent 12 to 14 to 16 years, maybe 20, they've spent a lot of years with these pets. So pulling out pictures, and some people say, oh, I could not possibly do that. I'm going to cry. Well, Tears happen to be the most healthy and natural thing that you can possibly do when you grieve. Your body knows how to take care of itself. Your body is manufacturing toxins at an exponential rate. And so releasing the toxins through tears is very helpful because you're getting the pollutants out of your body, and you will think better. You will feel better after you cry. Nobody likes to cry. Nobody likes to be in the moment of crying. But the afterward effect is very therapeutic. And so we try to suck in those tears and keep the pollutants inside, and it's exactly the wrong thing to do. So do let yourself cry and induce tears by going ahead and pulling out those pictures, because you're going to have a side effect that you don't expect. When you start going back and you start reminiscing, you're going to remember things that you had totally forgotten about. You forget about the time that they completely knocked over the Christmas tree, for example. And you're going to forget about the fact that, oh my gosh, this was a world-class jumper off the dock every summer. This pet could really go the distance. I forgot about that. So you start really remembering what that life was like. And it's easier to access the lessons that they taught you along the way. Bravery for them. Maybe it was a scary thing for them to jump off that dock the first time, and then you couldn't get them to stop doing it. There's lessons in there for us with that. You can also do things to commemorate your pet afterwards. There's a lot of different things. I encourage you to Google it, because you can see, how do I memorialize my pet? Just go online. There's so many different ways and things to do, but you definitely want to do something that marks the moment. You don't want to do anything that is going to make you feel like you have to forget this pet, because this pet came into your life for a reason, and we want to capitalize on that.
No, absolutely. Oh, Tammy, I bet this is going to be so helpful for so many people. Thank you for sharing this time and your insights with us and the Simon story. It's been wonderful. So for those out there, we're going to do a part 2 we didn't get to in this episode. Tammy has a book out on helping kids to grieve through this process with you. So we're going to talk about that in our next episode, and I hope you'll come back for it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my podcast. Come back often and tell your friends. If I can be of any help to you and your pet, please reach out to me via my website, www.somuchpotential.com. And for a lot more information, fun, and videos, please follow me, So Much Potential, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you soon.